Thanks everybody for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about how to run customer success in HubSpot. It's a question that we get a lot. It's something that I think more and more folks are looking to do. Maybe you've already adopted HubSpot for sales, for marketing, and sort of starting to think about what other functions, what other use cases can you support inside of your existing tool. So what we're going to try to do today is give you a really tactical breakdown of how we think about sort of setting up your HubSpot account in a way that's going to enable the sort of post-sale processes, the post-sale lifecycle of the customer, all the way from onboarding or closing a deal through onboarding and onto ongoing success and renewals. So we're going to get through some really quick introductions. Why run customer success in HubSpot? As I mentioned, there's more people seem to be wanting to do that. More people are asking us about this. So what is the case for actually going ahead and doing that? Then we'll dive right into our HubSpot account. We have some sort of a demo that we can go through of how we would set up HubSpot for customer success, some workflows that we would think about implementing, sort of some low-hanging fruit, or the first things that we would think about setting up automated workflows around, and then finally we'll close it out with some reporting and sort of dashboards to give you some visibility into what's happening with customers in their life cycle. And then, as we already mentioned, if you have questions, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but drop them in the chat as we're going here, and we will answer them if they fit in with, at the time that we're talking, we'll answer them right there and then. Otherwise, we will make sure that we cover them at the end. So first off, introductions. I'm Stuart Bolcom. I run marketing here at Arrows, where we build software specifically for HubSpot, which gives you a customer-facing plan to enable customers to make progress through their journey, typically during onboarding, but it can be other stages of the life cycle as well, to reach their goals and make sure that they always know what they need to do next and what that path to a successful outcome looks like. I'm joined by Shareil Narriman, who runs customer success at Arrows and previously led onboarding and success teams at Sprout Social and Booking.com. Hey, Shareil.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know this is a fun one because it's things that we're sort of in and doing ourselves. We use HubSpot for the full lifecycle at Arrows, and obviously building on top of HubSpot as well. So I think hopefully we're able to share some of the things that we've learned and some of the things that are hopefully helpful to other folks as well. So let's just get right into it. Why run customer success in HubSpot? Maybe not the first thing that you would think of, or the first tool that you would think of when it comes to customer success. There's lots of dedicated, CS platforms and tools that are branded as customer success tools, whereas HubSpot maybe more familiar with it from a marketing and sales perspective. So why should you do it? Well, first off, it forces process. One of the great things about HubSpot is that it has tools, it has pipelines, it has data, which is going to enable you to drive customers from where they are today, specifically through a process to get to an outcome. And if you want to scale your customer success practice, just the way that you enable customers through customer success, having a defined process that you can iterate on and improve is going to be super helpful in that. Next, it increases visibility. This is one of the big things that, love it or hate it, CRM, which HubSpot, of course, is, and has that sort of data-first position, brings everything together in one place, gives everybody who's interacting with a customer visibility and sort of context on what's happening, making it easier for all the teams that are interacting with a customer to know what's happening, know what a customer needs to do next, know what's blocking them, and help them move past that. And then finally, it connects the customer experience. So one big thing that we talk about is having data in one place makes it easier to provide a seamless and sort of consistent experience to the customer as well. Being able to see what happened with a customer in marketing that then went through sales, that then is now talking to customer success, means you have more context and can better help that customer, but also build systems and processes to help more customers have a connected experience that ultimately gets them where they want to go. And then finally, HubSpot gives you an opportunity to create a continuous feedback loop. One big thing that we talk about is always iterating and improving the process that you're running with customers, and having all the data, having every interaction tracked in one place means that you can always be looking at what's happening today, looking at the impact of what's happening, and then improving that based on the feedback that you're getting from customers. So we can obviously dive into anything that's there, but really connecting the customer lifecycle, connecting that customer journey in one place is such a huge advantage. So we're going to talk about how to actually do that from the sort of setup of and how you would configure your HubSpot account to start connecting everything together. So I'm going to jump into HubSpot. Shareil, I'm going to sort of let you talk through how we think about setting this up a little bit and sort of why things are set up in this way. But I'm going to jump right into a company record in HubSpot. So if I go back, we have all our companies listed here, and I'm just clicking directly into one of them. So Shareil, walk me through why there's lots of different ways that you could set up HubSpot. There's lots of different objects. You have deals, you have tickets, you have companies, you have contacts. Why is the company the place that you sort of start or use as the starting point for your customer success information?
Yeah, it's a great question, and also keep in mind this is obviously a 30 or 40 minute conversation around how to do this, and this is a huge topic. So Stuart has a bunch of deep dives into all of these that he'll share afterwards as well in a more detailed guide. But the highest level, once a customer or once a prospect moves through marketing, moves through sales, moves through onboarding even, ultimately your CS team needs to have access to all of that information in one place, or at least most of that information in one place. And in HubSpot's hierarchy, the company record is kind of that highest starting point, and everything else associates to that company. So if you have the HubSpot Gmail extension turned on, for example, you send an email to a customer, regardless of who's sending it, that paper trail now lands in this activity bar in the middle of this view here. If you have calls, if you have tasks, if you schedule meetings, each of those things are moments in time in that customer lifecycle that you want tracked ultimately. And same with the deals. Every time there's a change in revenue, whether that's a new deal, whether that's growth, whether that's expansion or even retraction, like you want to be able to track that and have a timestamp and know when it happened. Same with onboarding. We use tickets to manage our onboarding process. On that ticket, we attach an Arrows customer-facing plan. That's the piece the customer is working through as they're progressing through our steps, where internally, we want to know where that customer is, what they have done, what they haven't done potentially, and I want to be able to see that all in one place. Shareil, who is doing customer success in my team at Arrows, I don't want to have to message Stuart and ask what happened in marketing. I don't want to have to message our sales teams every time and ask, what are this customer's goals? What were they trying to accomplish? Will that happen? Absolutely. No one is perfect. We ourselves have missing fields all the time. You have to do these check-ins. It's twofold from the plan face or the customer facing side of it to prevent customers from feeling those gaps and those pain points. And then ultimately, the more of this is filled out, and this is where workflows, where automations, where required fields, all of that summarized into one word, process, that Stuart mentioned. Process is important here because it reduces the number of times I have to basically delay the customer from making progress by digging into these other places. So what you're seeing here is a basic version of a company record, but on the left-hand side, excuse me, we've created custom sections in this left-hand bar, one for kind of customer success, highest level metrics I care about. In my brain, when I'm thinking about leading this effort, I want to know when their renewal date is. That's something that's top of mind, especially as we think about end of year. I know most of you CS folks on the call right now are thinking about your renewals or thinking through when those things are. Okay, so the things I care about at the high level in customer success are what's the renewal date, when is the next QBR coming up, or check-in, or renewal review, whatever you want to call it, and generally what is this customer's health. And we'll unpack this health score a bit in a bit here with Stuart. From the onboarding side, regardless of if onboarding sits under your success function or it sits under your sales function or it's a combination of that or if it's a dedicated role or not, I still want to know what happened there. So I want to know who is responsible for onboarding these customers so I can quickly reach out to them. I want to know where that onboarding plan lives. In my case, I'm using an Arrows plan. If you're using a spreadsheet or whatever you're using, you can link that here. This is a customer-facing version of our Arrows onboarding plan, so I can quickly jump in there. This one's obviously completed onboarding, so all these tasks are marked off. And then I have an onboarding status. Those are kind of the highest level things I care about. Then, as you all know, HubSpot has hundreds of fields and properties that you can add and customize in here. But this is what I care about mostly at the company level. In the middle, I have all that activity tracked. So if I want to see what email Stuart had sent, I can unpack that down here. This is a demo account, so it hasn't tracked a ton of those. But in theory, you could see all of the threads, all the conversations from an email. If you're using third-party sales tools, those integrate into here and you can pull in all that activity. And then one thing I do is I have a pinned note that sits at the top of every company record. And this is twofold. Part of this is for me when I'm doing renewals or check-ins or quickly glancing at customers to have a sense of what's going on. And the bigger part of this is for the rest of my team. I have engineers who ask me all the time about a company. I have marketing who asks me about case studies. I have sales reps who want to know, is this a good time to reach out to this customer or not? What are their goals? So I've created a little template that you can build inside of Notes. The template is 3 basic questions. What do they do? What are their main goals for using Arrows in my case? And then what are some extra notes from a demo call? The other thing I like about this is it's always front and center. You can build templates to quickly do these things. And then depending on how often you're checking in, you can create additional notes in here or update this every time. So it's always the most pertinent information front and center. Now, obviously, this is a very summarized version of the hundreds of emails and calls and Slack messages that happen. So it's up to you ultimately to decide what are those most important things. But I generally like to know who a company is. I'm managing a book of hundreds of customers and I don't remember every single one if I'm being candid. This gives me a high-level glance of who they are, a high-level glance of what their goals are, and some general extra notes. So now when I jump on my QBR, customers hate being asked the same question twice. So instead of asking the same question twice, now I can just confirm. By the way, are your goals still to reduce onboarding by 25% or has that number changed? Are you still trying to decrease early lifecycle churn or have we solved for some of that? So now it builds trust. It builds a sense that this person actually cares about my business and knows the things I'm working on. And so I love having this pinned note at the top and then all associated activity below it. And then on the right-hand side is the other objects that you can associate with a company. So things like contacts should always be updated at the company level. Those should also be the contacts on the deals and on the tickets and so on. And so predominantly we use deals to do pre-sales or pre-success type of stuff. So things like the original sales deal, if a renewal is coming up, if there's an expansion opportunity, each of those in my mind should have its own deal because then you can also track the differences in this. So if you look at this basic example, this customer started off spending $8,000 with us when they originally signed up. And during their renewal, we're discussing a $10,000 contract. So now that shows 20% growth coming in NRR or in ARR based on the activities that happened from the point of sale to this renewal. And then the second object we use is kind of the post-sale world, which is tickets. So traditionally deals are in that sales world. Tickets are used for support and success type functions. I use tickets also to attach a onboarding plan to, and then use that plan to navigate the onboarding process. The big advantage of both of these things is they're tied to pipelines, which then gets you into the ability to visibly track where a customer is in that process. So here's an example of an onboarding pipeline. Someone had asked a question about like optimizing onboarding. This is a great visual representation of where customers are throughout this process. These stages for me match the stages or the phases that are on my customer facing side of the plan. I have workflows set up that automatically move customers through here as a customer actually makes progress on their plan. And then I have holding buckets like the ready for onboarding one. And behind that, the little indicator next to the 3 up there means there's some sort of workflow happening behind the scenes. And our workflow just says, when a deal hits closed won, create another ticket for me for onboarding. And so as my sales team at Arrows moves customers and moves prospects through demos and scheduling and reviews and actually gets them to the stage of closed won, they don't have to any longer worry about will this make it to Shareil's team or will we drop the ball on this, because this automatically creates now a ticket for me for that associated onboarding. We have another layer of built-in notifications here where if all the data is there, by the way, you can see in this workflow, I also want to flag things that are missing some of those required fields. I need to know, have they done their legal and procurement processing? If not, they shouldn't be in my pipeline. That should still be sitting with sales. So this is how you start to now force, for lack of better terms, some CRM hygiene and some process. But in that workflow, I create the ticket, and then I have a second workflow that Stuart's going to open right now that then starts to assign this ticket based on certain criteria. So in this example, I have two types of customers. I have a small and medium type customer, and I have an enterprise customer. And then on my onboarding team, I have different people that are potentially responsible for that. Or maybe there's a different process. Or there's a third category that doesn't meet either of these industries, and we eventually want to build a process for it, and I keep track of how many are landing in this bucket over time. So to start, what I'm doing here is saying, all right, if their industry is enterprise or their industry is small, medium business, then take one of these two paths. In that path, we have when were they created. If that meets that certain criteria, then create an actual renewal date for them. So what this is looking at is, in my process, we do renewals annually. So from the time a deal is created, already fill in that renewal date for me a year from now and attach a deal owner to it. We go through a rotation of different people on the team, and then that gets assigned specifically to the enterprise onboarding team versus being assigned to the small and medium onboarding team. Again, this is built-in process in here. And next is attaching an actual plan to it. So I know this customer is ready for onboarding. I might not have communicated anything to it, but now I've automated taking the physical arrows template, in my case, attaching it to that ticket and copying certain property value. This is one of my favorite. It's one of the most basic actions inside of a HubSpot workflow, but it's one of my favorite because it updates all of those properties inside of that company record we just showed you with information. We just have one example here of the plan URL, but you can also force it to update the company, the renewal dates, the QBR dates. Ideally, by the time it gets to me and my team, most of that information, if not all of it, is filled out. And anytime there's a process that needs to be automated, I can come and add to this workflow or have my sales ops team add to this workflow, getting me to the point where I am ready to send my email and I'm ready to prepare for this actual handoff. So between those two workflows, a sales has closed their deal, they've sold their deal, and a lot of things have happened behind the scenes before it lands actually to my onboarding team. Ultimately, what this means is I've reduced the manual, annoying things that we have to do in order to get a customer ready for onboarding. As far as the customer is concerned, they haven't seen any of that. As far as my team is concerned, they haven't had to go and manually update things. And anytime I see one of these workflows break, which is also a nice advantage of using workflows, is there's a history and an activity log in there. When something breaks, basically what that means is there's a gap in my internal process. If it breaks more than once, there's a opportunity to give feedback. So if I'm constantly seeing the renewal date missing, first I go check the workflow to make sure that's updated and working properly. Next, I go talk to our sales leaders and say, what's going on here? Are we not capturing this renewal date? Are we not adding a renewal date? Should we change the way we're processing that? But over time, as I reduce the number of gaps and the number of friction points in there, again, it does two things, right? It makes my life on the CS world a lot easier because now I get to spend less time doing what we all hate doing, which is cleaning up a CRM and keeping things updated. And I get to spend more time doing my job, which is talking to customers, helping them get onboarded, helping them get set up for their renewal, and so on. And then the second piece of it is, again, customers don't feel any of that frustration or those gaps. As far as they're concerned, they have a plan. They know what's expected. They know what's expected next of them, and they're off and running in their own world while inevitably I'm behind the scenes cleaning up our act and making sure that we have process in place and so on.
Yeah, one thing that I just want to sort of add on to that, and I think Sean made a great point, that workflow, one great thing about using workflows, yes, there's some automation benefits, right? You're going to reduce the manual work that you have to do. You're going to be able to take the tedious and repetitive tasks off of your team's plate, but they also allow you to document process. You can also add comments in workflows to say, this is why we're doing this step. Like, how do we make this more legible, more understandable as a process to anybody else who is running through this? we often use workflows to do sort of data validation to make sure that all the required data is available, because both that the workflow will fail if it's trying to do something with data that doesn't exist, but also to make sure that our team is effectively notified when any data is not available. The other way to do that, and one thing that I strongly advise, if you're using pipelines for sales, for onboarding, for any outcome-driven process that you're working on, any life cycle sort of stage that you're working through in deals or tickets in a pipeline, is to use required fields. And what that looks like in HubSpot is essentially when you go to move a deal or ticket between stages or between statuses in the case of tickets, you can specify what has to be in the data, what has to be defined at this point. So obviously test is not a great success metric, but we could go ahead and update that. And you'll also find that that's one thing that you may find, just because you require fields, people will just fill something in to fill in the field, right? But you're sort of doing two things when you use required fields. You're saying, these are the things that we really care about. These are the things that are important to know, but also these are going to be the things that we're going to use in the next stage, the next team that's involved in a handoff, the next team or the next individual who is going to be working with the customer needs to know in order to give them that connected experience. So the sort of two layers of defense, I guess, against missing data is, one is required fields in your pipeline or in your pipelines, and then two is going to be automations that are catching, if-then statements and automations that are catching any missing fields.
Yeah. And you do want to catch it. You do want to give feedback. It maybe isn't always the most comfortable if it's the same sales rep or the same marketing rep or the same success person, not to point fingers at any department. But the end goal is to make sure that the customer experience is the best it can be. And the more data anyone in the team has and the more information anyone on the team has, the more likely it is that you are not repeating yourselves with customers. You are instead confirming things. You are spending less time doing the reactive pieces of the conversation and more time focusing on strategy, on onboarding, on features, on renewals, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, we'll share the video for this after as well, but one thing that can be a really impactful way if you're just getting started with pipelines, or you're thinking about how do we take what we do today in a sort of more unstructured or less defined way and turn it into a process, is to start with those required fields. So what are the things that you absolutely need to know at every handoff, at every point in the journey, and then say, okay, which of these things are going to be generated or captured and entered by our team? Which of these are going to be captured and entered by the customer? And if it's the customer, can we put that in a customer-facing plan? What is the experience that the customer is going to have to provide that information? And then for our internal team, how do we put that in a playbook? How do we put that in a workflow? How do we put that in a place where it's known that that is important, and we make sure that we're capturing it every time, or at least as consistently as possible. So we've talked through the setup of the company record. We've talked through when in the life cycle you might use the associated records like deals, like tickets. So we're going to dive a little bit into one thing that I want to show before we dive into reporting. Shareil mentioned health scores. We'll show some other sort of example reports that you might be thinking about or might want to be recreating from where you're reporting on things already into HubSpot. But one thing that I want to show quickly from a workflow perspective is how you can use saved views in HubSpot to quickly surface the things that are, or the accounts that are that fit into different buckets. And essentially all we're using here is the companies list in HubSpot filtered by different things. So in this case, we have my companies, right? What are the accounts? This is, as Shareil mentioned, this is a demo account. So we just have one in here, but this is a list of, it could be 5, it could be 10, it could be hundreds of accounts that you're responsible for. So you can sort of at a glance get, okay, these are the things that I need to take a look at. You could also sort this view as well. You can quickly get to what are the at-risk accounts. Here we're just looking at a filter of health score is red. We'll show how that gets calculated in a minute. We have upcoming renewals, which is just looking at when there is a renewal date that is in the next 90 days. And then we have everything here on the right. So depending on who you are, whether you're a success leader, whether you're a RevOps manager, whether you're an individual CSM or onboarding specialist who sort of in the work working directly with customers, you may want a different set of views here. But using these filtered views gives you a really quick way to get sort of an overview of all the things you're responsible for, and then the breakdown of the sort of different statuses and different priorities which you might want to look at accounts. And the nice thing is that these are going to update automatically. So they're a filter that's set. Any accounts that meet that filter will show up in the view. As soon as that account doesn't meet the filter anymore, they'll drop off. So for example, if you had an at-risk account that you made a change, they were re-engaged, they started doing things that changed their health status, then they would move out of that at-risk bucket. And of course, having something like a health score, having some other data here helps with context, right? In this case, this has we'll talk about health scores more in a second, but this is a green health score that's in an upcoming renewal. If they have a red health score, then maybe that's a different type of renewal conversation that you need to prepare for.
And if you quickly jump to the at-risk tab, I noticed a little built-in bonus here. Views like this can also help you quickly draw your eyes to missing data. We'll show that in a dashboard in a second too, but there are 2 accounts in here that clearly are missing a QBR date. So all of them are missing a renewal date, which is part of this filtering in here, but also there are 2 that are missing an upcoming date. So not only are those 2 at risk, they don't have any sort of plans to talk with them about a renewal, and there's no plans for any sort of quarterly check-in that's coming up. Big red flags right out the gate there. So those would be 2 that I would focus on first as trying to get those things scheduled, then jump on to the other ones. Or if I'm managing this team in this case, I would reach out to Daniel or Benedict or myself and say, hey, what's going on with these accounts? Can we get an update on this? And again, if all that information's in that company record that I showed, you would be able to, in theory, open this company, see quickly, oh, here are their goals, here are the check-ins, here's some activity, or in this case, probably lack thereof activity. And all of us are busy, all of us have a bunch of calls, all of us are trying to juggle a million accounts and meetings and all that, and trying to keep track of all that is really hard. Take advantage of these list views or these different views of this data, because really it's the same 4 or 5 columns that we showed you in the onboarding and the customer success section. It's the filtering that becomes powerful in here to give yourself an upper hand of where to at least prioritize and where to focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that having this view helps you as somebody who is looking to, either you're working in this process or you're looking to improve this process. If you start seeing repeating patterns here, you start to look for opportunities like, well, is this a thing that we need to have better documentation around? Is this something that we need a better process around? Like, is it that people are scheduling QBRs and not updating the data in the CRM so nobody knows that there is an upcoming QBR? Or a QBR is not being booked, and just picking QBRs as an example here, right? Or is there just nothing being booked, and that's because the way that we try to book QBRs could be improved? Is it because we can go improve a sequence, or we can better surface information that would be helpful in making a QBR more valuable to the customer, so they're more likely to book, things like that. These sort of views are just a jumping off point to go and sort of explore and improve the process overall. So before we jump into reporting, and we're going to just cover a couple of high-level things. As Shareil mentioned, there are so many different ways that we could go down the rabbit hole on. We are going to follow up with sort of really tactical sort of how to set all this stuff up as well. But Shareil, is there anything else that you want to get into that you're seeing in the chat that we should cover before we jump into some of the reporting?
Not in the chat. Looks like everyone's just saying they can see the workflows. So I think we can kind of keep chugging along. I think the main takeaways here are ultimately know what information at the highest level you and your leaders care about, and then figure out how to capture that in one place. And from that lens, be able to think through where is that information coming in the life cycle, and how do I over time automate things, use workflows, build in process, build in require fields to make sure that information is there by the time it gets to your worlds. And if it's missing, great, that's an opportunity to fix the process, share feedback, and so on. So it's less about pointing fingers, it's more of and use this verbiage, this is intended to make the customer journey smoother. To do that, we need this information gathered at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we can run through a few different reports here. This is one that this dashboard is sort of a number of reports that we created around the onboarding stage of the life cycle. This is an example of, if you have a specific life cycle stage, whether it's onboarding, whether it's renewals, whatever it is, you can create a specific view for that stage of the life cycle for companies that are currently active in that stage. So maybe, Shareil, do you want to talk through sort of what's in this dashboard, and then we'll get into the health stuff as well, or should we start the other way around?
I can quickly touch this one.
Yeah.
This is basically a combination of Arrow's plan data and HubSpot native data in one place. So what I use this for is to get an overview of my onboarding pipeline. You can see information from HubSpot, like who the deal is, who the owner is. And then there's some information that's pulling in from the direct integration we have with our Arrows plans. So status of the account, target dates, how many days are left to that target date, what's the current task they're working on. What this lets me do is at a high level see overall where these customers are, get a sense of how many days there are until target dates. The columns let you sort and filter, so I can quickly adjust this. And then for each person on my team, they have their own view of this. So they wouldn't be looking at all onboarding deals. Stuart would be looking at the ones he's responsible for. And again, what I like about this is it quickly draws your eyes to the areas where there's something missing. We know that if a task is assigned to somebody, it's more likely to get completed. There's a bunch of tasks in here that are missing assignees. I would open those plans and attach them. Things like that customer's been on that task for 42 days. Probably going to churn, probably bad onboarding happening there, probably bad follow-up, but definitely room for concern to figure out why has it taken them 42 days to gather a list of team members. And then if you quickly scroll down through here, I also like to look at things like how much revenue is sitting in each of these stages, how many people on the team are responsible for how many accounts in any given time. This lets me prioritize. This lets me think about hiring. This lets me think about bandwidth. And then I use a lot of HubSpot native tasks, which we build in through workflows and through process to also flag when things need to happen. So in this case, something is triggering this HubSpot task to be created and to be assigned to me specifically. That's why it's showing up on this dashboard. And it's just telling me that I need to send a reminder to this specific company. It's also telling me I did a really bad job because this was due in October and I haven't completed that part of it. So again, a quick way to draw attention to certain parts of those stages and life cycles. And we have these types of dashboards for pretty much every pipeline we manage because I want to be able to quickly see where customers are in the process, how much information about that deal is there. This last report specifically is looking at companies that are missing success metrics, i.e. someone didn't fill out the goals field inside of HubSpot. So what this tells me is going into these onboarding calls, I'm either going to have to validate this information. Better yet, I'm going to have to go dig before that to try to get those success metrics. And behind the scenes here, what I'll recognize is there's probably a required field or a process that's missing. So how do I go build that into the workflow, build that into the pipeline, and so on. But this overview gives me kind of a high level of what is all going on in onboarding, who's responsible for what, and what do I need to do to make sure that progress ensues.
Totally. Okay, so I'll jump through this customer health report. Customer health scores are one of those things, or one of the questions that we get most often when people are looking at running customer success or post-sale process in HubSpot. Shareil, I'll ask you a little bit about take on health scores. I know we go back and forth on, and I think there's a lot of sort of ambiguity around how do you create a health score, what should go into a health score, what ultimately is, what does health actually mean? And I think the thing that, and I'll step through how we built this a little bit, but the biggest thing is that your health score is only going to be as good as the data that you give it, right? So really thinking through, and ideally looking at your own data that you currently have for your happy, successful customers, and then sort of working backwards to these are the things that we actually want to consider good indicators of health or lack of health of an account, and then putting that together into a health score. One place that I recommend starting if you just sort of want a directional indicator of where folks are going, and this is the way that we have our health scoring set up. Calling it health scoring is maybe a little fancy, but we essentially look at a consumption rate, right? How many Arrows has usage-based pricing, so it's sort of easier to compare. But how much of what you bought are you actually using, right? So in Arrow's case, we have plan-based pricing or number of plans based pricing. Maybe you have seat-based pricing. Maybe you have data consumption based pricing. But if you've bought 10 seats of an account, are you using 10? Are you using 5? Are you using 1? It's going to be a really quick way to get some sort of indication of where on the scale is a company. But what we're doing in this case, this is comparing a lot of different things, all using HubSpot calculated properties. So we have some different categories that we're looking at here. We have product usage, so that's sort of that consumption metric that I mentioned. How much of what they've purchased is an account using, and which are they using all the features that they have access to? Are they using specific key features that we know are important to them getting value? Where are they on the sort of support spectrum? Do they have a lot of escalations? Do they originate a lot of tickets? Or are they relatively self-sufficient and aren't adding a lot of cost on the support side? Some measure of sentiment. So that could be things like CSAT. It could be things like NPS. It could be sentiment from your CSMs who are talking to customers, their assessment or their confidence in a customer receiving value. I think that's one thing that's really important to mention when it comes to health scoring, is that most of the data that we collect as a company is pretty company centric, right? And at best is sort of a proxy to the customer actually being successful. And often CSMs, or the people who are talking directly to customers, who are capturing their goals, who are having that conversation about the value that's being delivered and the way that the product or the company is improving our customers' life, is going to have sort of a better finger on the pulse than a lot of our big data. And then finally, some kind of advocacy score. Are they participating in case studies? Are they reviewing the product on G2 or Capterra, things like that? I'm just sort of rolling all of that up into this calculated health score, which if I go to, if I go to companies, and then, not that, if I go to calculated health score, you can see that the way that we're calculating that health score, and this is one of the really nice things about HubSpot calculated properties, is it allows you to get creative with things like we're creating a weighted score here, right? We're saying that not everything that is a contributing sort of input to this score is going to count the same, right? We care much more about the product usage and their support and their sentiment than their advocacy, right? And you could shuffle these numbers around. You could put things together in a different way to fit what is going to be best for your business. And then if I go back to that dashboard, you'll see that we also have a couple of other things here. So we have this health sort of status, just is it green, yellow, or red. All we're doing is looking at, in a workflow, we are looking at what is the value of the health score, and then depending on the range, so if it's, I think the ranges are 0 to 5, or 0 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 and 10. And depending on that range, setting an emoji as the color for the health score, which is sort of a nice visual indicator of where they are. And then finally here, and I think this is the thing that is important, however you're doing health scoring, however complex or simple your health scoring is for a customer, what you really want to know is which direction are they heading, right? Are we getting better at making this customer successful? Are we helping reduce the risk of churn? Are we increasing the renewal and expansion potential? Or are they heading in the wrong direction? So by comparing what the previous score was against the current score, we can get to a trend, either up or down or sort of flat. on that. And then, as Shareil mentioned, one of the big things of having, or the big advantages of having data and everything in one place for sort of the entire journey and being able to have everything in a sort of a structured format is that you can slice and dice that data in different ways to get some more insights. So we can break down, high level, what is the percentage of our total number of accounts that are healthy, that are at risk, or that are just sort of sat in the middle. And then the same thing by CSM, right? So for an individual CSM, what does their book of business look like? What is the sort of breakdown there? And then finally, this is probably a report that, I don't know, Shareil, your take on this, but pretty much every dashboard that you have, or every object that you are working with, whether it's company, contact, deal, ticket, whatever it is in HubSpot, but is to include essentially this missing data report, which is just looking at, like, show me the accounts that are missing a specific piece of data that I care about, because that's always going to be the first place to look. To make sure that we know what we need to know about that account, but also to go and fix a process that is potentially causing that missing data or not catching that missing data that potentially impacts the customer experience. So I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna jump back in, and I'm curious to hear what the questions are. Shareil, what your sort of overall picture, like where do you think, what do you think is the biggest misconception for folks who you talk to, your experience running CS in HubSpot? What's the thing that you think is, maybe you thought was true before we started running CS in HubSpot? What do you think that is sort of actually something that is relatively easy to overcome, or actually a huge advantage for you?
Yeah. I think what my own realization has been over the years is you can already do a lot right out of HubSpot, Salesforce, all the general CRMs. Like, there's a lot you can do in there to start. And what we tried to show is kind of a basic version of that. As you saw, like, health score can be made up of all sorts of different inputs and metrics and the way you calculate it. But at the highest level, I want to know if it's green, red, or yellow. And that helps me at least have a starting point. And what I've really learned with HubSpot specifically is learning, and I try to always learn, like, to me, health is ultimately the opposite of a risky account. I'm more concerned about those risky accounts, the ones that are a little bit more propense to churn, and so I'm looking for patterns there. And what I've done, even qualitatively, is look at the last 10 customers that have churned and try to get a sense of why. What happened? Was it low login? Was it low usage? Was it no meetings, no QBR scheduled? And then determining those things helps me identify, okay, these are the things I should probably start looking at going forward for new customers. And eventually you can get enough data to be able to say, okay, this customer is or isn't healthy right now based on what I know. And the health scores are generally really hard to do. There are tools and robust analytics and all sorts of things you can build around it. Same with CS platforms, same with onboarding platforms. The biggest takeaway for me is something like HubSpot can do a lot of that. So at least start there and build your process and build some automations in there and build something you can test before going and trying to automate everything, before going and trying to layer on more tools. I think we are all quick to jump to more tools because we're trying to solve a customer pain instead of focusing on what will likely solve the customer pain first, which is our internal process, our internal tracking of things, the data we already have our hands on. Like, there is so much data out there. I've worked with huge analytics teams and I've had access to things like Tableau and BI tools. And the more data you introduce, the more difficult it becomes to make sense of it and tell a story and unpack it. And that's not at all to say don't go that direction and don't strive for that. Just don't start there. And I see this in onboarding a lot too, where people will come to me and say, we want to automate our onboarding and we want to have full in-app guides and we want to have full modules that guide customers through the process. Excellent. Let's strive for that. But it starts with one human-led call. It starts with one process. It starts with one email. As you build on those things, capture that process in something like HubSpot, build required fields, build sections where you can start to see that high-level data. The list view Stuart shows I really love because it's not complex data. We literally were looking at 4 or 5 properties and just cutting them in different filters and different views. But now I have a sense of my book of business, and I care about those 2 or 3 things. Over time, will I care about 10 things? Probably. Will my manager care about more things? Probably. Will I have to hire another team and another industry like segment that I'm going to focus on? Yes. But my point is, like, start with what you already have access to, build that in the place where you're already building, which is usually the CRM. And that's the place where you can now give feedback to product. You can give feedback to marketing. You can give feedback to sales. And what that looks like is, if there's one sales rep, and I'm really not picking on sales, but in this example, if there's one sales rep who continues to send over deals without the goals field, that's an opportunity to give that individual person feedback. So it'll help you also identify some of those internal gaps more quickly than trying to go build an entire new tool or entire new process to try to solve for something. And then the other advantage of already doing it in something like HubSpot is the reports. Once you have, like, those dashboards we showed is really 2 or 3 reports powering a lot of that. It's just positioning them differently, filtering them a little bit differently. I myself never used HubSpot until about a year ago. And in that year, I have found that I'm pretty comfortable in there and can build most things and can go in and build process in there myself. And that has also been a pleasant surprise, because now I can know what the job is. I can determine what other information I care about, and then I can figure out how to find that. And the tangible results have looked like customers in my world going through onboarding faster, getting to renewal conversations a little bit more easily. Those conversations become more of non-events. They're more like, yes, we're doing this. There's so much value. We're gonna renew. I still have customers that churn. That's completely normal. It's going to happen. And I'm unpacking why they're churning and trying to learn from it. Was it just a misfit altogether? Was it something we dropped the ball on? Was it a process we could build in there? And so on. Beth is asking, how long did it take to set up the parameters and workflows you use? Well, I've been at Arrows for a year and 4 months now, so somewhere in that time frame, I would guess. But ultimately, it's just like, I constantly, and Stuart does this alongside me, we constantly have a process we're running and we're reviewing it in real time. So we're creating new plans, we're creating new workflows. We have set up a bunch of workflows that we have over time determined we actually don't want that automated. We want some manual control over that, and we want a human coming and intervening. So it kind of depends on the workflow, but generally what we like to do is start at the most basic version, take one trigger and a couple tasks that need to be done, and then as the qualitative side of it, Beth, is when something annoys me or annoys my team or annoys someone on the team enough, we try to think through, can we automate this? Should this be part of the workflow? Or is this part of the process that we just need to do? So, and I would say we've really gone heavy on these workflows in the last 5 or 6 months. So that's a good frame of reference for how long it can take to get to that level that we showed. But you can go build the most basic workflow today of trigger is customer onboarding status is complete, create a task for the CSM to reach out and introduce themselves, and now you have automated a handoff internally.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. That I think that everybody wants to jump to automation or likes to jump to scalable, infinitely, we'll support infinite number of customers, we'll support infinite team size. I think the real power of having, and this is why we're stressing that the data is really the starting point, and the data is so important is that once you have data that is more, it's never going to be 100% clean, but once you have all your data in one place, you can start to look for, as Ricky just said, like, what is the trigger? Like, what is the moment that I want to be notified of? What is the threshold that needs to be reached in the data to loop in the next person, the thing that, or maybe an automation is the next step, but often that next thing will be, let's just surface that this is a customer, this is a contact, this is somebody who has met this threshold, they need attention at this time, so that you don't have to go manually dig through all your accounts and do that work to figure out what do I do next. The system can sort of surface those for you, and then ultimately CSMs, onboarding team, humans can do what they're best at, which is look at the context, look at what's available, and make the decision about specifically how should we handle this. Because until you have enough data to predictably say, this is how we should always handle this case, automating things will often get you in more trouble than it's worth, because you'll send an email to a customer that didn't actually make sense, or you'll send an email to a customer that, they had already done the step, it just wasn't tracked in the data, and like those kinds of things. So keeping a human in the loop and just looping them in at the right times can be a really powerful way to start using workflows and automation, which will save you a ton of time, but not run the risk of ultimately hurting that customer experience.
Yeah. Enrique's asking a good question too. I'll try to answer, then Stuart, maybe you can give your thoughts from the more RevOps side of the house. But what are the limitations of trying to run this whole thing in HubSpot? Great question. To me, the answer is kind of dependent on what tier of HubSpot your company has, because there's Sales Hub, there's Marketing Hub, there's Service Hub. In each of those are different tiers, and that's what unlocks ultimately things like workflows and custom automations and custom reports and all that kind of stuff. So depending on which tier you have, that can potentially limit the things you're doing or not doing in there. As far as even the most basic tiers, like you're still going to have company records, you're going to have contacts in there. If you likely have Sales Hub, which most people pair Marketing and Sales Hub together, you're going to have deals and pipelines associated with deals. Tickets sometimes is the one that people don't have because it's part of the Operations Hub. So that one I see sometimes being added later.
Service Hub. Yeah, there's
Service Hub.
There is a free tier of everything to sort of give you the basic objects, but it's really when connecting those things or automating things, that's when you're going to start seeing the step up that is potentially limiting.
Yeah. And I think as you start with those free tiers, Enrique, and start to build on them, it becomes easier to justify that next level of spend or the upgrade or adding more user seats, because ultimately that is how you can prove this is why we're doing this is why we need value, and so on. So I hope that helps a little bit. To run Arrows, do we need any packages within HubSpot? So Arrows, the product, basically integrates and sits on top of today the deal object or the ticket object. So you would at minimum need Sales Hub and or Service Hub to make the deal card appear in there. And then once that appears, you can create a plan for a customer, you can send a plan to a customer, and you can see the progress of it in that card that sits on either of those objects. If you want to get into the automation world and the data connections, then there's different tiers of both Arrows and HubSpot that you might want to get into. But as far as creating templates, creating plans off of those templates, sharing those with customers, the basic tiers of both products unlocks that for you.
Yeah, I think that in terms of limitations of HubSpot, we hear this all the time, like what is the business case? Like there are lots of more CS specific or onboarding specific tools out there than HubSpot. I think one of the big things to consider, and again back to the data, is if your teams are already running parts of the customer facing process in HubSpot, you likely have a lot of data there already. Anytime that you adopt a new tool that's creating a new silo of data or going to create a new silo of data, it's not just about you getting the data that you need, but you're also moving data that you're creating and that it's those interactions that you're having with the customer away from other teams. So I think that is a big advantage of using HubSpot here, is being able to connect that customer journey. So yes, there are a lot of things or some things that will require more configuration to do in HubSpot. I think HubSpot ultimately will more natively support a lot of the things that we're sort of building in workflows or building through calculated properties and that kind of thing over time. But today I would say that that's really the trade-off, is there's going to be more configuration, and that's why we're running workshops like this, why we're creating sort of publishing playbooks and all this kind of stuff. Like there'll be more configuration to get to the sort of features or the functionality that you might want. But the huge offset of that is you already have the data, you already have your teams in HubSpot, instead of having to ask them to move somewhere else or creating a new silo that you have to push data back from. Yeah, that it's the data. Data is definitely one of those things. It's really hard to. Everybody today is using so many tools. Ultimately, keeping all your data together is tricky. Um, there are some great ways to move more data into HubSpot with product usage data, that kind of thing, that we can share some walkthroughs on. But thank you everybody so much for joining us. And Shareil's dropping our LinkedIn profiles in the chat. Come say hi. We publish a bunch of content, trying to make as much tactical content for running customer success in HubSpot. As we try to be as helpful as we can. So if you have any questions, if there's anything specific that you want to see that we haven't covered, let us know, and we will try to do that as well. If you want to check out Arrows, arrows.to is the place there. Again, customer-facing onboarding plans that attach to deals or tickets in HubSpot. But yeah, Shareil, any final words?
Nope, just start somewhere. This stuff's hard. It's a lot. I know there's a lot going on. There's a lot to think about. There's so many different ways to think about data, and take the most basic version. How do you make your job a little bit easier today? How does that improve the customer journey a little bit? And then just build on that. Don't try to go automate the whole world and fix every problem you have. It's just going to overwhelm you and everyone involved. So start small. You'll all get there, and then definitely let us know how we can help.
Absolutely. And we will send out the recording. It'll probably be tomorrow that we send that out, but we'll send out the recording along with sort of more tactical, like how-to guides for the things that we showed in this workshop today. But thank you everybody so much for joining. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and we will talk to you soon.